What's going on, everybody? Welcome to the Alex Cuesta Show. I am Alex Cuesta. How is everybody doing out there on this Wednesday, April 5th, 2023? So for the second week in a row, David is pretending that he has work so he doesn't have to come on the show. So I think at this point, we are going to start holding tryouts for a new co-host. No, I'm kidding. But David isn't here. He has work again. Like I said last week, if you'd like to hear us not have to do these types of things, just, tell everybody about the show. Let's get that going. But lucky enough for us, we have someone that decided to fill in. It's one of mine and Dave's good buddies, Scott Gillian. What's going on, Scott?
Hello. How are you? I'm thinking about throwing a funeral for him.
We should. I mean, he's kind of useless. But overall, we're pumped to have a show. Before we jump into the show this week, like, share, follow, subscribe, rate 5 stars on Spotify and iTunes. Spread this word of mouth. Go find us on the socials. Just go search the Alex Cuesta Show. And I just want to talk about last week's show. Last week's show, we technically didn't have a guest, but we did. Hack No Kappa, someone you've heard on this show before, a good buddy of ours, was going to fill in as a guest host for David, but we ended up not having the guest last week. So Hack ended up being the guest as well. We talked a whole bunch of things. Definitely go give that show a listen. It was a fantastic show. But this week's show, we're going to have a fun-filled show, I think, on something that is important. We've had a good amount of important shows, but I think this week is going to be another one of those that's important for you to listen to. Take the information that you're getting and go and start to use it in your everyday life. Our guest this week is Shawn McBreairty, Director of Special Projects for Maine First Project, host of the Maine Source of Truth podcast and Facebook page, and he's on Twitter at Shawn McBreairty, and he's been called America's Most Dangerous Dad. Where did you get that title from, Shawn?
Yeah, thanks for the opportunity, first off. So my friend Sharona Bishop, who's known as America's Mom, she does a podcast on a number of different items. She was just giving me an intro one day, and she said that, and it kind of stuck, and I kind of joked, and we joked that I need to either trademark it or copyright it. But, I'm the America's Most Dangerous Dad because I'm willing to speak my mind. I'm willing to defend my kids, your kids, the neighbors' kids, the state's kids, and ultimately the nation's kids. Because right now, these kids are just being destroyed mentally, physically. They're being abused in these schools, and it's really a difficult situation all the way around.
So what is up with you guys more northern to the border? Between you, we had Billboard Chris on the show, which is just another dad that got fed up with the shit and decided to take a stand. We have you, who is a dad that decided to take a stand. I feel like you guys in the north have just more balls than the rest of us going down here.
Yeah, Billboard Chris, a friend of the podcast, I had him on and actually was standing with him at Boston Children's a number of months ago, doing my first official peaceful protest with him. Nice. Really trying to fight the just the transgender mutilation nonsense that hospitals like Boston and Barbara Bush here in Portland, Maine, are doing. These double mastectomies to kids under 18, because instead of dealing with the root cause of the issue, the mental issue, the mental imbalance that's going on, they tell these kids that if, hey, we chop off some parts, it'll make you feel better. And clearly that's not happening. But to answer your question, I don't know. It might be because we have really, really cold winters up here. And, I'm an outdoorsman. I like to snowmobile and hunt and fish. I've got a truck. I have a dog. I own guns. I know folks can't see it, but I'm wearing my Trump for Maine hat.
Shawn, what you mean is you lost all of your guns in an unfortunate boating accident.
Actually, I've heard that several times. That's a true story, and it is. It's one of those deals where I just think folks in the north, I guess I'll say it out of both sides of my mouth, Alex, because there's a lot of beta males here in Maine as well. And that's happening all over the country. These men are being effeminized through that process. And I have actually, we'll talk about it a little bit later, but yeah, a local school district, Herman, is suing me for my First Amendment rights. And one of the first things in their lawsuit, they say, and he approves of toxic masculinity, referring to my Twitter bio from months ago to just piss off liberals, right? And I don't think toxic masculinity is a real thing. I think you just have to be masculine. You just have to be a man, a father, a dad, somebody that's willing to stand up for your kids. and not take any grief. And so, you know, I'm a 225-pound white dude who's a little pudgy at this point, but used to be in decent shape. And I guess folks like Chris, who does it in a very calm manner.
I don't know how he does it.
I'm pretty intense. I guess folks have said, but I've never pounded the podium. I've never been physical. But man, liberals hate it when I show up at a school board meeting or I start talking about their nonsense because they can't defend it.
No, there is no defense of it, and they also don't know what they're actually doing half the time. They're just kind of going along with it. And, you know, and you mentioned some of those hospitals. We're going to add New Jersey to that whole list because Phil Murphy just signed into law. Basically, gender affirming care is law now in New Jersey. So New Jersey is a state, along with others like California and stuff like that, that their official stance is chemically castrating children and doing eugenics on small children. But I want to jump into your story first. How did you get started down this path? Because it takes a lot. One of the things that, you know, me growing up, I've seen is people on the right have always been kind of scared to be conservative, right? They've always, you know, it's been cool in your own pockets, but you never kind of said it out loud. You know, growing up, you didn't really tell people you listened to Rush. You didn't say these types of things because it was those, oh, he's an asshole. We don't like it. So what was it that got you going that was finally like, this is the last straw? I'm coming out. I'm conservative. I believe I'm right. I see something wrong, and I'm going to stand up for this.
Yeah, thanks. And I'll be 100% honest with you. My dad has listened to Rush Limbaugh for years, decades, obviously until his passing. Yeah. And I didn't like it. I didn't like the news. I never watched the news. I was never political. And I always voted. I always believed in that right. But I would never watch the news. And 100% honest, God's truth, 1 year before I appeared on Tucker Carlson's show, I didn't know who the man was because I never watched that stuff, right? I'm an outdoors guy. I was president of my snowmobile club. I was on the Land and Conservation Commission. I would just rather go out and cut snowmobile trails all by myself than to deal with this nonsense. But on June 2nd, 2020, the families in Cumberland, North Yarmouth, Maine, near Portland, which we would call Northern Massachusetts at this point, received a white supremacist letter from our equity committee from our school superintendent. Now, this is on the heels of George Floyd's death as Minneapolis is burning to the ground. And I kind of turned to my wife. We were working from home at COVID, you know, COVID political theater and the whole deal. And I said, you know, are you reading this stuff? I mean, what world are we living in? Because I thought Cumberland, Maine was the nicest town on the planet. It actually is the most affluent, most educated, safest town in Maine. And yet we had American communists and socialists on this equity committee and the school board pushing this anti-racism nonsense, which I would call it anti-racism because it's racist. And so I pushed back very politely to the superintendent and said, hey, look, by the way, you're throwing the police under the bus. It's in our annual report every year. We're the safest town in Maine. Our boys in blue are outstanding. And you're missing the big picture, which is peaceful protest, free speech. Talk to your parents, talk to your priest about what's going on. And you shouldn't be pushing this social agenda in our school. And he very quickly came back and said, you're not woke enough to understand what you're talking about. So I went back and I was a store manager of a supermarket. I had 150 employees. We had 10,000 customers a week. I always treated everybody with respect, regardless of skin color, dress code, sexuality, creed, whatever. You know, they were a customer and you had to treat them appropriately.
Yeah.
So I went back and did some homework and I started sending in Freedom of Access Act requests. So in some states, it's called FOIA. In Maine, it's FOA. And it's really the biggest weapon that anybody has, a taxpayer has, to fight and find out the lack of transparency that's going on in these schools. And once I started digging in, this company that they had hired out of Boston called Community Change, Inc., CCI, run by a woman named Shea Stewart Belay, who is a lunatic, by the way. She just happens to be a black woman from Chicago. And she's all about, you know, being oppressed and selling white guilt to white soccer moms, woke white women here from Maine. And in their June newsletter, it said, in order to eliminate racism, we must eliminate capitalism and move to a socialist and anarchist form of government. Now, I'm paying for this garbage with my tax funds in the school that my twin daughters were juniors at the time. So we had a meeting together to talk about the fact that these guys shouldn't have anything to do with this company. And did they do any background checks? Did they do any diligence at all? And the superintendent said, well, I can take care of that. I'll have a call with them. We'll get rid of them. And he lied to my face. 2 weeks later, I asked him if they had been fired. He said no. And I basically told him, after I'd started to gather an incredible amount of information, that this school system was teaching critical race theory. So CRT, the very easy definition for anybody listening, is anytime that skin color is used over content of character, and anytime you are an oppressed or an oppressor group based on the melanin count in your skin. And I basically said to this Superintendent Jeff Porter, who I will call the lying narcissist Jeff Porter till the day I die, I said, look, Jeff, if you're not going to fire these people before, I think it was 6 o'clock on a Friday, I think it was July 3rd. So it was the Friday before the 4th of July, 2020. I'm going to uncork this grenade to social media and everybody's going to know what you're doing. And he never replied. He sent out a tweet later that said, happy 4th of July weekend. And I uncorked it on a, 2,500 Facebook page, 2,500 residents in Cumberland, North Yarmouth. And I figured, well, hey, here's the story. Here's what's going to happen. And it wasn't, I swear to God, this was like at 10 o'clock at night. It wasn't 30 seconds later until the first leftist popped on and said, hey, are you not saying, are you saying that this anti-racism work is not important and you must be a racist and you must be privileged and, the whole deal, right?
Yep.
So anyway, longer story short on that, I got thrown out of a couple school board meetings. I was ready to go to jail to protect my First Amendment rights. I didn't want to go to jail, but I was ready to go. The school board chair, Tyler McGinley and Maximowicz, both of which I would call American communists, they met with the town manager and police chief to basically try to get me thrown out.
And
they had a little meeting.
Quickly, you didn't mention this. You had twins in the school at the time, juniors, right?
Yeah. So I think now we're probably we're probably in our senior year because it's in the fall. So they're approaching their senior year. The worst senior year probably since Vietnam, by the way, given the amount of COVID nonsense that these guys had to go through, just destroying the social aspect of high school. It was a cluster, but I ended up fighting, and every day I was exposing them, and more parents were asking questions, and more parents were really kind of back and forth because in the town, half the town thought I was a hero and half the town thought I was a zero because we're so divided in America. Every single small town, including Cumberland, Maine, a town of 10,000 people, half of them thought, hey, this guy is a right-wing extremist, right? And I'm just like, holy crap, I'm just a dad trying to figure out why I don't want you to spend my money on calling people racist.
You know something, Shawn? I've also found as I think back at my education, we didn't learn much about communism. In public schools, we basically went from World War II, kind of skipped a little bit, Cold War, Cuban Missile Crisis, and McCarthy, and calling everybody a communist. That is what my extent of remembering communism. It wasn't until I was older that I took it upon myself to learn about Maoist China, to kind of read excerpts of the Gulag Archipelago, to learn about Pol Pot and things like that, and realize that people wearing the Che Guevara on their shirt are absolute morons because Che Guevara was an absolute Marxist revolutionary. So we sound like crazy people, right? Because we're sitting there going, no, these people are Marxists, they're communists, and then everyone's like, no, it's a boogeyman word. It's like, you need to read a little because we weren't taught this in school. And I think it's intentional, Shawn, because you have the school system now is basically, as much as people don't know this, a lot of it is based off Marxist theory. It's based off Paulo Freire and what he brought in from Brazil, and it's in the education system in the colleges. So, you're battling up against this, and it just makes me think it's easy to realize now why so many people go against this. Go against what we're trying to do here. It's because they don't understand that what they're seeing with the critical theories, with CRT, with gender studies, with queer studies, it's all different forms of Marxism, just coded in different ways.
Yeah. And ultimately, so, you kind of referenced it when you start talking about this stuff. So I believe it's communist totalism, really. And if you don't follow the program and bow down to the masters, then you're the racist, misogynist, homophobic, white supremacist, because once they start calling you names, you know that you win because they can't defend their argument. But really, it's the destruction of America through the family unit, through the degradation of democracy and morality. It's division on the normalcy of sex and the division of skin color. And it's really easy. Skin color, you're able to see it, right? Yep. So when they're teaching 5-year-old kids, which is what I just, discovered in this MSAD 51 in Cumberland, Maine, and Greeley, allegedly the best school system in Maine, they were teaching kids in kindergarten and they were giving them books all about skin color and the difference. And it was horrible. But So we spin forward. I'm fighting for a year. We get to a point where they eventually kick me off campus and say, you cannot attend your senior daughter's graduation because you've been exposing us for critical race theory for the last year and fighting us tooth and nail. And it was one of those things where I remember the police officer pulling up to my yard, and I was friends with all the police officers down there, great group of guys. And Tony comes in and he says, hey, we're cleaning out my attic, right? So we're selling the house in Cumberland. We've bought a house in Hamden, which we'll speak to here in a minute. And Tony says, hey, Shawn, I hate to do this, but I got to give you this prohibitive conduct warning, which is the first step to a no trespass warrant, which says I could not attend my kid's graduation. And I had to go back. I put it in my pocket for like an hour and a half because my wife, I knew she was going to murder me. And I said a little bit later, I said, hey, hon, I just want to let you know, Tony was here and this is the story. And, she, instead of her slapping me, which she's never done, but just that was running through my head, she said, well, how are we going to fight it? And I said, I don't know how to do it besides just doing what I'm doing and kind of just keep pushing forward and really working through this mentality of just not taking no for an answer. So that ultimately became on Sunday, Breitbart News cracked it. Then it was the Daily Wire. On Tuesday, Tucker Carlson's producer called me. I appeared on that show, I think on Thursday night, if I remember right. I was the first in-studio guest at his studio in Maine, which was a privilege. Nice. And then it was Harris Faulkner, Sky News Australia. I might have done the Fox News morning gang there after. I can't remember. But it became, and so it's a global story at this point, right? Dad can't go to graduation because he exposes critical race theory.
Yep.
Yet 90% of Maine still has no idea what I'm talking about when I'm starting to talk about critical race theory.
Nope.
And so I had sold our house in in Cumberland for a king's ransom. I had bought a house on the river here in Hamden. I'm living my best life. And I quit my job as contract IT manager of Maine Health, the biggest health system in Maine, because I just needed to take a break. I needed to hit reset. I needed to take a pause. Kind of wanted to take the summer off. It was something I had never done, and work on the house and kind of get things in order. And ultimately what happened wasn't very long after I was here that friends and family said, hey, look, you spoke up for parents who were unwilling to speak or scared in Cumberland. Do you know how bad the Hamden school system is? And I said, geez, no, I don't know what to do. Like, okay, hey, if I'm not going to fight for these guys and take arrows for people, then who's going to do it kind of thing. Now, my kids have graduated, right? They're no longer in high school. I don't have any skin in the game, except for I'm paying $4,000 a year in property taxes to indoctrinate my neighbor's kids. And that's the piece that other people don't recognize. When somebody says, hey, Shawn, you don't have you don't have kids in the school system. I'm like, it doesn't matter. We're paying to indoctrinate our neighbors' kids. So I started doing some homework on the 2022 Maine Teacher of the Year as designated by the woke Maine Department of Education. Her name is Kelsey Stoyanova. And she came out with a book list, which very quickly I found critical race theory, Ibram X. Kendi. Mm-hmm. I found anti-father, anti-police, transgender, LGBTQ, and hardcore kiddie porn, children porn, not to be confused with cat porn, and I'll mention that later. But it was very easy to see that this was a political leftist agenda. And Kelsey had in her classroom, the classroom that we as taxpayers allow her to teach in, and she has not lost her job from this whole thing. She's in fact been celebrated even further. She had a poster on the wall for All Boys Aren't Blue. And I will dare anybody to take All Boys Aren't Blue and sit down in the middle of a middle school, playground and start reading from this graphic, hardcore sexuality book. And she was pushing it with prizes, incentives, and daily announcements to 11-year-olds, right? Now, I don't remember exactly what I was doing when I was 11, but I was probably trying to play wiffle ball and basketball and maybe occasionally try to go to a dance. And maybe I was tee-heeing around girls. And now they're having to fight off sexuality constantly, constant sexuality, hypersexualization in these middle schools. And I have testimony from multiple students that say the levels of anxiety, depression, and thoughts of suicide are through the roof because they can't just be kids anymore.
Certainly. And, you mentioned earlier about how people are being instead of having a mental diagnosis treated as a kid with gender dysphoria, and I want to just push back a little against that is I don't think any of these damn kids really have gender dysphoria. I think so few of them have it. What they're doing is they're going through normal puberty. When you go through puberty, everything's worse. Your emotions are everywhere. A zit ends your fucking life. It's like things are crazy. You don't know what you want and you're changing and all this. And anxiety, pressure, pain, like all these things are a part of it. But now we're sitting there and treating puberty as if these normal things going on are actual gigantic medical problems and not just a normal process of being a kid. Now, there's certainly something to being said about social media exacerbating some of this, right? Because back in the day, you had always had kids that got bullied. But what was the thing? They got bullied. Once they were out of school, the bullying was basically done. You could always go hang out with your group of friends, hopefully not cross that group of friends you didn't like. And then, school might suck, but at least you got away from it. Now they never get away from it. So I kind of understand maybe some things are getting a little worse, but not to the point where we've taken it. So, or how it's been taken, not we, but how it's been taken. And I do have to ask you real quick. You're a proponent of school choice, right? You believe that we should do school choice. What's going on in Maine? Is Maine anywhere closer to getting there? Are you fighting for that over there?
Well, we're fighting for it. We have no chance in hell because our worst governor we've ever had, Janet Mills, is a leftist progressive Democrat. The House and Senate are controlled by leftist Democrats. Our DA, who just got caught today for a sexual scandal inside his own office, is a Democrat. And so you hit on some good topics there. And I want to back up for 2 seconds.
Sure.
One of the things I had She Van Fleet on my podcast a little while back, a few weeks ago. And she was able to come to America from communist China, I think, when she was 26. But she went through the whole communist piece of Mao and seeing, people get killed. And we talked about the Red Guard. And the Red Guard in China was basically what's happening today with these kids in school. Yep. And what I'll call the trans cultists. They're being turned. It's an enablement of mental illness. There are kids that are, needing attention, and these schools are giving them parties when they come out in their gayness when they're 11, 10, 11 years old or younger in some cases. But really now today, it's the Blue Guard. It is the Democrat National Committee. It is Democrat driven. 99 out of 100 people who have attacked me over the last 3 years are registered Democrats because I used to keep a spreadsheet. And basically what I'm seeing is it's not the old school Democrats. It's not like my grandfather, who was a sheriff of Somerset County here for 20 years, who ran as a Democrat. It's not like my uncle, who was in the legislature, that was a Democrat. This is liberal progressivism. And again, it's a communist indoctrination. It's Maoist in its form. And again, their whole goal is to divide and divide and divide. And so these kids that they're enabling this mental illness, saying that, hey, yeah, you can be a dog or a sheep, or if you want to be 63 genders, like in Herman, Maine, you can do whatever you want. And I think in San Francisco now, they're up to 93 different genders. It's a bunch of nonsense. It's a bunch of complete horse crap. And instead of them saying, hey, listen, Karen, why don't you take off those ears and the tail and get back to class? I'm going to kick your ass out of school. They now say that they're a trans species in a protected class, and you can't say anything to. In fact, if you're a teacher and you don't bark back or meow back to that, furry in a classroom, your ass is on the line, not the kids. And so it's just, these schools are just evil incarnate at this point. But to answer your question, educational freedom is what I preach. And I say to every single parent, take your kids out of these schools tomorrow. They are irreparably broken. There is no fixing them. They've screwed them up for decades. We're not going to fix them in weeks, okay? And if you can't do that, because it's easier said than done, if you're not going to fight for your kids' education like their lives depend on it, because they do, we're seeing kids kill themselves because of the educational manipulations in school, then there's no third option. You either fight like hell every moment to save your kid, or you pull them out. So educational freedom, in my opinion, is a no strings attached. The tax money, property tax money follows your child, homeschool, Christian school, whatever it is. But we have no chance in hell, at least for the next 2 to 4 years here in Maine, because the Maine GOP are a bunch of rhino wussies.
Yeah, a lot of the GOP. That is a national GOP problem. But my only pushback against school choice, and I don't think it's a bad option, my pushback is, I mentioned Paulo Freire and the university system, and that's where they're learning it. Even if you do pull your kid out of the school and say you get them to that private school or that really good Christian school, where do you think they're getting their pool of teachers from? Even Christian schools, they have to have, degrees in education, right? In order to teach there. It's still it doesn't necessarily solve the problem. School choice, and I think a bigger way to fight this is, and I agree with you, would fight like hell. My bigger way to do it would be, especially if you're going to pull your kid out to homeschool them, right? Then obviously you have the ability and time to do that. If you have the ability and time to do that, show up to every damn board meeting like you did with a group of people. Go to war. Get on these boards. Get on your city and town councils. Do all these small local things. And I feel like that would help a lot more than just, because you could force the government. Like, we've seen some big things go on around the country, and I know Corey DeAngelis is doing great work with that. Chris Rufo is really good with that type of stuff. But I listen to James Lindsay a good amount in New Discourses, and he constantly brings up, we can have all the school choice we want until we fix the schools of education in the university system. It's really not going to make a difference. And I think he's more right in that front, because you have these elite private schools. Let's pull our kids out and send them to the private schools that send these kids to Harvard and Yale, which are the two most woke places on the planet. So it's like, as much as I do like the concept of school choice, I think we have other things that we need to beat back first in order to make school choice a viable option.
Yeah, no doubt. I agree with you 100%. And one of the things, we talked a little bit before the show about what do you do to fight back? And I mentioned Freedom of Access Act. That's your most powerful weapon. They do not want to be transparent. They don't want you to know what's going on behind the scenes. They don't know where you want you to know where the money's going. The big grift right now in Maine is social workers, pumping social workers into the school. I was at the Herman school board meeting the other night, of which I got shut out of public comment, and like 4 or 5 deputy sheriffs showed up. But anyway, whatever. Basically, they had a $1.8 million line item for mental health for the school on an $18 or $19 million budget. So whatever that math is, 10% of their budget was going to go towards mental health. So what they're trying to say is, we're going to give you the dream scenario to solve for the nightmare that we've caused the last 3 years. So there's only 2 things in Maine that the school board is responsible for. One is creating policy. So if you can flip the bench like the Supreme Court and get one more conservative critical thinking voice on the school board, you win. And I agree 100%. That's a 2 or 3 year cycle. Yeah. I 100% support it. You've got to get in there and find candidates and displace these leftist progressives. You have to know who's voting for what. And it's pretty easy. All you got to do is go to your town clerk and say, I want the voting party of record of all of these school board members. And you'll find very quickly whether or not 7 out of the 10 or 11 people are Democrats. And that probably gives you an indication that you're screwed. Yep. And you've got a long road to hoe. But speaking at school board meetings, attending school board meetings, exposure. I tell parents we're in a 3-act play. Exposure is the first act, and we're stuck there in Maine because no local media will cover this. The Bangor Daily News, Portland Press Herald, WABI, News Center, they're all a bunch of woke, they're like the 4th branch of government for Janet Mills at this point. And people like yourself, and I really appreciate you trying to get the word out, but you've got to expose it. And then people start to try to speak to solutions. They find out very quickly these school boards don't care what you say. They don't want any solutions. They want to continue, and they'll double down to prove it. And lastly, I say, if you can speed up to the 3rd act in the play, which is taking back local control of your school board, that's what you got to do. So I think these skirmish battles, these book challenges and a bunch of other nonsense, you can go through all that stuff. But until you replace that school board and then fire the superintendent and fire Drummond Woodson, the bullying legal arm of these schools, you're not going to get anywhere. And so, yes, pull them out now. Fight for them later, and then hopefully you can fix the school system. But like I said, it's going to take decades at this point.
It is going to take a little while. Go ahead, Scott.
Sorry, Alex.
No, go.
Question for you. Since you go out to these school board meetings and stuff, and you're talking about deputies showing up, I've always wondered, what's the best way to legally keep yourself out of going to prison that night just because you wanted to speak at a school board?
Yeah, that's a good one. And I'll tell you, in the fall of 2020, my wife was crying from the dining room table at 7:00, or 7:15. Meeting, I think it was at 7:00, because I mentioned these guys conspired to arrest me for my First Amendment rights. So I think people need to go back. They need to read the 14th and First Amendment of the Constitution, something that, again, they don't teach in school anymore.
Nope.
Read your state constitution in Maine. It actually says in our state constitution that students are supposed to be taught it. They're not. They're breaking the law. But to answer your question, I have a great relationship with almost all of the police forces. I'm very upfront and transparent. I usually get with the police chief in the town that I'm going to speak with ahead of time. And I say, hey, here's how this is going to go. I'm going to mention a groomer teacher at the podium. They're going to lose their shit. And then they're going to shut me down. And I'm going to stand there until you try to remove me. And now you're in a difficult spot, officer or deputy, because you took an oath to fight for the Constitution of the United States, an oath under God, by the way. And I'm not doing anything wrong. I'm just using my First Amendment rights. So
have they
it's a
told you
roundabout.
flat out not to go?
What's that?
Have you found any that have been like, listen, just don't go, please?
No, nobody said that. You know, they don't want to be weaponized. They don't want to be weaponized against citizens from the schools. That's what's happening all over the place. I had Scott Smith from Loudoun County, Virginia on my podcast, and ultimately he came up here about a month ago and went snowmobiling with me. But Scott was the unfortunate father whose daughter was raped in the bathroom by a biological male wearing a dress, calling themselves a transgender woman in Loudoun County, Virginia. Yep. And that is going to happen. And I tell parents all over the place, like, are you going to wait for your daughter or your son to be put in a bad position like that and maybe lose their life or their innocence because you decided not to fight? And when I say fight, I don't mean physically fight. I mean, use your rights. Understand the law. If you read the school policies, you will 100% know more about the school policies than those school board members. They are really, really, really dumb people. They are. It's just incredible, Scott. So what I found in my very short time was when I started looking at some of the school board policies in Cumberland, there was two ways you could provide public comment. One, they had like a 15-minute public comment time, and they'd give you 3 minutes, a whopping 3 minutes to make your point. And then you could comment on anything that was on the agenda that was going to go through a vote. So I went up and I spoke for my 3 minutes. And then every agenda item, I would go up there and hammer them. And they were like, you can't do this. And I said, it's in your own freaking policy right here. Like, here's the piece of paper, And it's just a back and forth. But you're dealing with a lot of useful idiots in these school board meetings. And what I found is liberals, it's really well-educated, really stupid people.
Don't a lot of school boards also have the ability that even if you're there to request a stay for public consent on any policy? Because I thought, like, if they, like, I know some of them have it built in where if you're there and they say something, you'll be like, hey, I want to be able to research this a little more in order to, give my public consent, because ultimately they work for us, right? They're supposed to be working for the people that pay their taxes for these schools. So definitely look into, all school boards are a little different, but if you're interested in this, absolutely do what Shawn said and look into the policies. Now, I want to jump on to Chapter 117. What is Chapter 117 in Maine, and why should we be opposed to it?
Yeah, so this has been going on for a while, and we found that so this is a rule that the Maine Department of Education is looking to enact, and I'm going to read from it. It says, and we are saying, to say no to Chapter 117. I'm going to be in Augusta tomorrow in person to provide testimony. You can provide Zoom testimony. You go to the Maine Source of Truth Facebook page. It's all written out there for you. And if you can't do Zoom, you can provide written testimony. But it's a policy that is basically going to expand the powers of school counselors and social workers to keep transgender and sex-related secrets from parents. And this results in separating children from their parents under emotional blackmail that parents are not safe and that they're abusive for not succumbing to this transgender ideological cult that is in the schools. And so what we've seen here is in Damascotta, Maine, a little town on the coast, 2,500 people, the quaintest little town, picturesque town you'd ever want to see in Maine. A friend of mine, Amber Levine, her 13-year-old daughter was given a chest binder, which is basically a medieval torture device that you put on to, hide your breasts, from a 26-year-old social worker who went from food service to college to grooming kids named Samuel Roy. And Samuel Roy told her daughter, hey, we're going to call you a different name at school, and we're going to use different pronouns at school, and I'm going to give you this chest binder, and do not tell your parents. Keep it a secret. Now, when the mother tried to ask questions about this, first off, the superintendent and principal were shocked, and they were kind of emotional about it. And then the lawyers stepped in, Drummond Woodson, again, the bullying arm of all Maine schools, stepped in and said, hey, no, don't talk to this mom. They shut her right out. So she went and gave public comment. You can see it. I think it's now had been seen like 350,000 times on my Maine Source of Truth Rumble channel. And Amber goes up there and gives her 3 minutes, and not a word from any of the school board members, because in Maine, they don't have to say a word. They don't have to say anything to your public comment. It's all intended by the teachers union, the MEA, which is a offshoot of the NEA teachers union, just a bunch of woke idiots. They're trying to protect their teachers from being called out on their nonsense. So very quickly, the school board member, his name is Samuel Man-Bun Belknap, the third, by the way. He's a registered Democrat. He said instead of hey, thank you for your comments, we should probably do an investigation. We'll get back to you. He actually went 180 degrees the other way and said, not only are we creating safe places for our schools, but we approve of this transgender nonsense. There was no investigation. Samuel was never suspended. He didn't lose his job. He's been celebrated. There were 35 teachers that showed up wearing all red to support Sam in grooming, sexually manipulating, mentally manipulating, abusing this child, this 13-year-old minor girl. And so anyway, Amber has gone through 6 months of hell, her entire family. And just today, she filed a lawsuit, a 14th Amendment lawsuit against AOS. I think it's AOS 93 in Damascotta, Maine. And I hope she takes them for millions of dollars. The dollars aren't going to make it any better, but it sure would feel good.
Yeah. It certainly would. Now, if anyone wants to go and do some light reading, and it's not light at all, it's terrible reading. But if you want to go do some reading on why social workers, right? Why a bunch of social workers coming into school? Go pick up Education in the New Age. You can actually find it online. Just go Google it. They have PDF copies. It's not crazy long. By Alice Bailey. She is kind of a base. She's a theosophist, and she's a base behind a lot of these beliefs underneath. Now, some of the stuff in there is just batshit crazy. If you look up theosophy, they're kind of nuts. They're basically into that like witchcraft type of stuff. But go look them up. She started off a publishing company, the Lucifer Publishing Company, and now it's, I forget, the Lucius Publishing Company now, and they publish all the books for the United Nations, and there is a theosophical shrine in the bottom of the UN. So it's more than what you guys may think it is right now, and it's definitely worth going to read. Alice Bailey wrote a ton of crazy shit, but this pertains to what's going on in school and why social workers right now, because social workers are a big key in the profession of social work into what they're doing and trying to push a lot of this, especially gender studies stuff. So I encourage you guys to go and do some reading on that, because your eyes will be open a little bit, or they'll shut even harder and you'll call me a conspiracy theorist. So whichever way you want to go. But, I agree with you 100%, Shawn, that, chapter 117, something like that, where they're hiding things from parents like this. And, and it started, Shawn, a lot of the times with, where did it start? It started with abortion, with this type of stuff, right? Where this type of stuff was going on, where people would facilitate abortions for young girls without their parents' knowledge. And because of the rules of abortion, their parents never actually had to be privy to it in a bunch of states. And now I think that was kind of a test run, right? People pushed back against it, and, Roe got overturned, but then they saw that there was enough people indoctrinated and brainwashed that they could push this type of stuff and get away with it. And now we're seeing that next level. So what can people do that, is there anywhere, you said they can go on the Maine Source of Truth page to go and leave some comment on it. Is there anything that they should look up before leaving the comment? Any source that you can?
Yeah, so we've got some artifacts there. Yeah, we've got some artifacts from Courage is a Habit. Alvin Louis is a great guy. He's been fighting in Maine, and we've been partnering on these things. But we put together a half dozen of these artifacts on various social workers, the American School Counselors Association, the National Association of Social Workers. We've got people in here that are school board members, teachers. It's just, these are like the dirty half dozen in Maine, but there are hundreds of examples on the Maine Source of Truth Facebook page. I don't know how many examples parents need, but what I'm finding is it's kind of like a fight, flight, or freeze situation. When I say, hey, there's pornography in your library, and these people like Samuel Roy are looking to take your child from you, physically take your child from you. And the other piece is that when Amber fought back and provided testimony, 4 days later, Child Protective Services showed up at her door, just like the FBI is doing now, to try to influence her to not go any further. Now, ultimately, after about 90 days, they provided her a report that said, yeah, no big deal, you're a good parent. But they're being weaponized. these, it's the Maine Department of Education, it's the Maine Library Association, it's the Maine School Management Association, it's Principals Association. It's all of these organizations that are grifting on the taxpayer. It's huge business. In Maine, education is a $3 billion line item on the budget. And but to answer your question, yeah, I would say if anybody wants to listen to any of the educational horrors on the Maine Source of Truth podcast, you can find it anywhere, Google, Spotify, Apple, wherever. I think I've done 60 episodes. I don't do them every week. It just depends on kind of what's going on. But I've had some really great guests from all around the country. Chloe Cole, I mentioned Billboard Chris, Nicole Solis, who's a warrior, Scott Smith, a lot of these folks. And do your homework. But it shouldn't take you more than 15, 20 minutes of reading, because I've given you all of the information you need to really, really be scared for your children's lives. That's how bad this shit is right now at this point. So I would just say, hey, follow me on Twitter at Shawn McBreairty. Look at the YouTube videos, look at the Rumble channel, follow the podcast, follow us online on Facebook. And there's more than enough information to go down the rabbit hole. And you could literally spend all day looking at these examples.
So have you found that any of the school board people have said that it's not porn because it's drawn and it's not pictures? Because I feel like that's one of the ways that a lot of them try to get around it, right? Like, no, this isn't a pornographic image, it was drawn. That's just an expression of art. Have you found them trying to use that at all?
Yeah, the librarians are the worst people in existence at this point in time. They're the most radicalized, taxpayer-funded educational terrorists. And I don't use that word lightly. They are educational terrorists. They are putting pornography in the hands of children to normalize sex, because I believe if you can get an 11-year-old to pick their pronoun, that math teacher can get that 11-year-old to pick them as a sexual partner. That's how bad this stuff is. And again, once innocence is lost, it is never regained. Once it's out of the toothpaste tube, you can't stuff it back in, right? And maybe that's a kind of a bad graphic when I'm talking about this.
You can't put the pin back in the grenade.
Yeah, exactly. So it's gone. Your kid's innocence is gone. But basically, here's what happens every time we talk about gender queer, which is a cartoon kiddie porn it's a cartoon graphic porn. It's got.
Have you read it?
I can't even go through it all. It's just gross, right?
Have you read it? Because I've read it and it is disgusting.
Oh, it's horrible. It's horrible.
And so what child abuse. That's all. It's a neglected child by their parents. It's actually a sad story. It's really sad.
And even the author says it's an 18+ book, but these guys are getting it lower and lower and lower into the age group. They're pushing it in middle school in some schools in Maine. And every time that we talk about gender queer, some leftist will go up to the microphone and they'll be like, and gender queer, which is a memoir. And you have to kind of say it like that, because if you don't say a memoir and you just say it's a cartoon kiddie porn book, it sounds graphically gross, because that's what it is. Yeah. These guys will defend it all day long, saying, well, we have certain students in here who are transgender. And I'll say to every parent, I say it every time, never tolerate the word gender. Gender is a social contagion. It's made up by John Money, a pedophile. His two brothers killed themselves because of the horrific crap that he did to them.
Yep.
And so do not tolerate it, because if you tolerate gender, the next is acceptance, and then it's participation, and then it's celebration, and the liberals will never stop. And that's what happens to some of these girls. If you're a girl without a strong moral background, a Christian background, let's say, if you don't have a father in your life, or you're from a broken home, if you're on the spectrum with ADHD, if you don't make friends easy, the gay sexuality alliances in Maine are cults, and they're stealing these kids.
They love bomb.
Yeah. And it is so graphically disturbing, because the other thing to remember is, right now, only 24% of Maine kids can do math at proficiency. That's from the 2022 Nations Report Card. Only 1 in 4 kids, can do math at proficiency. And only 36, I think, % of kids, or 1 in 3, can read at proficiency. So the issue is, in 4th grade, if you can't read, you have a 70% chance to go to prison, because you're going to go down a path of, just total mayhem. And so when you start putting that math together and saying any time or taxpayer money spent on any of this social emotional learning crap, which is a Trojan horse and the gateway drug to critical race theory and hypersexualization, if you go through any of these situations like that they're trying to push with transgenderism and pronouns and all this garbage that isn't being spent on the basics of education, you're failing an entire generation. Now, I'm 52 years old, so I'm probably much older than you guys. But, I used to think that, we might have been the last generation that came through school with the basics of education. And then it started to really start failing over the last couple, 3 decades. And now these kids have no chance in hell, no chance at all to learn what they're supposed to learn, to then maybe go to college. 1/3 of Maine kids have to take remedial math because they can't get into the 101 class at the University of Maine.
Yeah, it's sad what's going on. And we definitely have to get back to the basics in terms of what we're having our educators learn how to teach, right? And also getting the curriculum proper by going through school boards and things like that. So I lastly want to give you a chance. I want to talk about some of those First Amendment lawsuits that you mentioned earlier. What is going on with the First Amendment lawsuits? What's happening with you in those?
Yeah, so this is kind of an interesting story. So last May, I was served on my steps by a Penobscot County sheriff for a lawsuit basically saying that I was hazing a school teacher. Her name's Mallory Cook. She quit her job last summer, and she went to work for the Maine, the MEA, the Maine Educational Association, the Maine Teachers Union. So she went from grooming kids in Herman to now being able to groom kids all across the state. And the magic word for me was sexual predator. I called her a sexual predator. Might have been on my podcast. I believe I can back that statement up, because there's multiple things here. And first off, she did an anti-Trump, pro-Bernie Sanders, Maine People's Alliance video from the classroom she operates in the fall of 2020 with taxpayer-funded equipment. Okay, first off, that broke a bunch of policies. So you already know she's a leftist. She was the paid faculty advisor to the Gay Sexuality Alliance, a taxpayer-paid cult inside these schools, talking sex with kids after school. So if you have a kid, you can send them to soccer band chorus or talk sex with a 40-year-old teacher after class. Okay. Then she got Scott, go ahead.
No, I said hard choice.
Yeah, right. I know. And parents didn't know what it was because it just said GSA on the extracurricular list. Nobody had a clue what it was until I broke that open. And Chris Ruffo, you mentioned that earlier, He busted it wide open last summer. It's a 4,000 school, 40 school, multi-million-dollar situation sponsored by, I think, might be Castle. I can't remember.
It's probably Castle, the SEL.
Yeah. And millions and millions of dollars going into the sexualization of your children. But anyway, the last thing with there is she got $1,000 grant from the MEA Teachers Union to create a 40-book transgender library display that also displayed 63 different genders to kids as young as 13 in Herman High School. So first off, I wasn't hazing a teacher. Hazing is basically if you're giving wedgies in the locker room, right? Like this isn't a hazing situation. This is an exposure. You are a cultist. You are a groomer. You are a crazy sexual predator. And in this situation, I was like, look, we'll fight this right to the Supreme Court. I've got a great group of lawyers, Randazza Legal Group and Center for American Liberty, and we will win it. We've got a hearing coming up in April for that. But it was all about me going to the school board and exposing them, and they don't want it. Like I said, they don't want any of this stuff out to parents because parents don't know right now. Not enough parents do. Then I had to sue my local school board here in Hamden because they threw me off the podium when I mentioned Kelsey Stoyanova's name. Again, super groomer Kelsey Stoyanova, 2022 Groomer of the Year, because, again, the teachers union in Maine wants to protect them from all negative situations, basically. And we won a federal decision from an Obama-appointed judge, a 28-page letter that basically said, I don't really like how Shawn does it, but you have to listen to him and you have to let him say what he wants to say. Now, we won that. We won a $40,000 lawsuit, of which I didn't take a penny of taxpayer dollars. It all went to legal bills. And then in February and March, the same guy, Heath Miller, who is another useful idiot, he's a cow farmer from Newburgh. He's truly a useful idiot. He threw me out again twice with police presence. And so we had to sue him again. So right now we're suing my local school district again in a federal lawsuit. And ultimately, I want to galvanize parents' rights to go to the podium and say anything they want as long as they don't incite violence and they don't use actual obscenities, which I would say are the 7 things that George Carlin said you can't say on TV. Anything beyond that, they can control time, place, and manner restrictions, and that's it. And then lastly, I've sued Herman, who is suing me for willful FOA violations, First Amendment violations, and color of law violations because he called 911 on me because I took a selfie of him in the superintendent's office. I've got all the reports to prove that. It's as stupid as it sounds. I took a selfie picture. The superintendent lost his shit and called 911 and had a deputy come to escort me off of the premises. because I was trying to get information from a Drummond Woodson lawyer handbook, which said things like to superintendents to hoard your cash when it comes to the budget. So again, FOA request, exposure, cracking down this lack of transparency. I hope we win all of these. But right now, I think I did add it up before I came on. I think I owe my lawyer like $58,000. Now, I'm not pleading financial ruin, but what I've said to people is I'm not going to use my kids' college fund to fight for our rights and your rights. So if there's an opportunity for anybody to give or donate, or if you know somebody who knows Joe Rogan, it would be great to have a few shekels thrown my way. Yeah. And like I said, I will not put $1, not one penny in my pocket. I'll use it to fight these things. And when we win, I'll create an offensive legal fund and I'll help other people in the state and around the country. But it's www.givesendgo.com/Shawn McBreairty. And you can find that on my Twitter bio. I think it's my pinned tweet right at the top.
So yeah, that was my next question I was going to ask. I feel like a lot of people are scared of that, right? A lot of people are scared to step up, have to really challenge. And, if they do stand up there and quote unquote cross the line, that they might get sued. Do you know of any other resources nationally that parents could reach out to? I know Moms for Liberty is great in terms of backing people up, but anything legal wise that you could kind of point people to where if they do get into this hot water, is there somewhere that they could find where there's good lawyers that will defend them?
Yeah, it was a godsend that Mark Randazza called me. I remember sitting out near my fireplace, kind of wondering, what the hell am I going to do? I'm getting sued. My wife wants to just, bludgeon me every night. She asks me every couple of weeks when I'm going to get a job. And, like I said, I think this is a calling. I think this is my job. I think God gave me the skills to take arrows for people. But to your point, most of the legal lawyers, in the country are liberals. Yep. And so I would say 75% of the lawyers don't want to take your case to begin with because they don't believe it. There's a cesspool of legal folks out there. Don't get me wrong. But Mark Randazza, that guy, like I said, he is an amazing person. I owe him a lot, not just financially, but we've become good friends and he's taught me a lot. But it's really hard. I've given Mark a few clients. I've given my local lawyer here, Brett Baber, a few clients, and Amber Levine being one of them. But, there's the Goldwaters out there, and there's Mark Randazza and Center for American Liberty. There's not a lot of resources. I can tell you it was a struggle, and it still is a struggle to find people that are willing to do this because, like I said, I owe Mark whatever it is, 58 grand, whatever the number is at this point. And that's sitting on his books. We're going to win that money when we win these lawsuits, but that's some real cash for a business owner to put out there. And, he's a $900 an hour lawyer. So, these lawyers have basically got to say, hey, look, am I going to win this? And am I going to win this easily? Or is this going to be a long, drawn out process going through discovery and a jury trial and take years and years and years and hundreds of thousands of dollars to fight? Most lawyers are like, yeah, I'm not doing that, So I probably didn't answer the question real well. I'm just going to tell people, do everything within your power, within your rights. Try not to step over the line. You got to find out where that line is. But like I said, reread the 14th Amendment, reread the First Amendment of the Constitution, know the school policies front and back. And the other thing I say is get one of those Robert's Rules for Dummies book off of Amazon for like $6. And you will go into that meeting and destroy the chair because they have no idea what they're talking about. The first time you raise up and say, point of order, Mr. Chair, they look around and they're like, wait a second, what is this guy saying? And what you're saying is stop the meeting because it's bullshit, right? And they'll go to recess and they won't be able to handle it. So, but anyway, from a legal perspective, yeah, just to button that up, it's tough. And if Mark hadn't heard about my story from a friend of a friend, I don't know what I'd be doing right now.
Yeah, that's tough. But you know what, though? In the end, I think we're getting to it's the right thing to do. Because if we're not fighting for our kids, nobody else can. And that's, and instead of, we're in a very selfish time in human history. Advent of social media. And it's like, people could argue what we do here, right? Podcasting, it's kind of like, but I think we're doing it for a bigger reason, to talk to a lot of interesting people, get some messages out. And everyone is pretty selfish. Social media, TikTok, all this stuff. As a parent, you kind of have to sometimes stop and not be that way. And I think this is a big thing that's worth fighting for. And Shawn, I really want to thank you for coming on the show. This was lots of fun, man.
No, I appreciate it. And just to button up the podcast thing, I've been doing that for about a year. Like I said, 60 episodes. People tell me all the time, you must be making money off your podcast.
Nope.
And I say, yeah, I am. I've made $37 in 1 year, right? So we're not doing this for the money, guys. No. We're doing this for exposure, and I just really appreciate it. Anytime you want to talk about education, you know where to find me, and I look forward to building this relationship, and I hope you guys have great success. And thanks for putting this together, man. And Scott, thank you very much for not saying a lot but listening. So thank you.
Absolutely, anytime. Hey,
all
can
right,
you
guys.
do us a favor and spell your last name?
Yeah,
it's got every vowel in the alphabet.
Yeah, it's E-air in the middle if you get it right. So it's Shawn, SHAWN, MC capital B REAI, R is in Robert, TY, and just throw it in the old search engine, and unfortunately you're going to find hundreds of national stories, a few global stories, a bunch of videos, and lastly, I guess I'd say I'm learning every day how to become a better Christian man, how to become a better father, how to become a better partner. But the only way I know how to do this is to go full bore in and just speak the truth. I think a time for niceties is over. And you just got to say what you got to say, because these kids have got to be worth it to you. And it's the only reason that we're existing on this planet.
Scott, do you have anything else to add before we jump out of here, brother?
No, that was great. Thanks for the lessons on what the hell they're doing in school. The chest binding thing's fucking crazy. I mean, I can just imagine the left's reaction to if it was happening in the Catholic Church. Like, it would be a fucking meltdown, let alone here it's a state-funded property. That's just insane.
Yeah, insane is a good way to call it, yeah.
But if it was happening in a mosque, they'd be cool with it. But I digress. But anyway, again, this is the Alex Cuesta Show. He is Shawn McBreairty. Please go listen to the Maine Source of Truth podcast. He has on some fantastic guests that I would love to poach from him. And also, go ahead to his Twitter, at Shawn McBreairty. He just spelled it out for you. Go look him up. Go support him. Support his causes in any way you can. Even subscribing to his show. That is a small thing that you could do. It's free. Go do that. And if you like an episode, listen, share that with people. Word of mouth is the biggest way that we can grow in the podcast space. If you like what you're hearing here, you like a lot of the, conservative content, the nerdy content, the sports content that we bring on this show, tell someone like, hey, you like podcasts? Oh, yeah. You like that Joe Rogan guy? Alex Cuesta Show. It's pretty cool. It's not like Joe Rogan. They do some different stuff, pretty conservative. If you like that, go for it. That's the best way that we get out there. And if you're very passionate about education, you've been hearing some fucked up things going on, but you don't necessarily know what they are, go find Shawn. Maine Source of Truth. That's the reason why he's there, to kind of let people know. And listen, if it's happening in Maine, you got to think it's happening everywhere else, because Maine is essentially Canada. They're really nice people. And if it's going on there, then it's definitely going on at a school near you. So be a good person, step the game up. And we really appreciate all this stuff that, just anyone listening right now, we appreciate you there. So like, share, follow, subscribe, rate us 5 stars. If you like it, go find us on the socials, and we will be back again next week with another great show. So long, everybody.